I am an architectural designer. I have an office, an emerging, say, interdisciplinary architecture office in Istanbul, as well as I'm also pursuing my PhD in architecture history and theory in Cornell University in New York. And today I will try to develop a flat aesthetic trajectory in which the genesis of art and architecture is constituted by not only multimodal enmeshments of human and non-human individuals and operations, but also peculiar ritual networks called diagrams. In contemporary artistic and architectural discourse, Deleuze's philosophy is utilized as a common starting point for the conceptualization of diagrams. This conceptualization, however, becomes problematic when Deleuze's notion of the diagram is prematurely appropriated in bits and pieces without paying attention to its subtle roles in his overall philosophical consistency. Cosmetic abuses of Deleuze's philosophy have become widespread within art and architecture circles, as I hope we are all aware, for, say, legitimizing unrelated formal exercises, garnishing underdeveloped conceptions, and allying artists, architects, and theorists with the so-called fashionable trends of French theory. But despite Deleuze's unprecedented popularity, the relationship of artistic and architectural discourse with Deleuze's notion of the diagram has ironically been nothing but a huge missed encounter. A missed encounter in the sense that the radical consequences that follow from the flat ontological role of Deleuze's diagram has been rarely developed to bring forth a flat aesthetics at the intersection of art, architecture, and virtual thresholds of life. In what follows, I will unpack the far-reaching implications of this intersection, first by elaborating an artistic diagram based on Deleuze's elaboration of Francis Bacon's work, and second by expounding an architectural diagram based on sophisticated nest constructions of bowerbirds. Deleuze develops his notion of the diagram within the field of art and painting, especially through the work of Francis Bacon. The ontogenesis of artistic production begins with an encounter between an artist's assemblage and the tangled forces of life. Bacon's artistic assemblage consists of the interplay between his body and his tools, such as his distinctively large brushes, specific oil color palette, and unique use of unpried canvas. The artistic assemblage, therefore, is never generated by an autonomous figure, but always by an interactive assembly of organic and inorganic bodies, all of which have differentiating degrees of agency within a distributed network. In one of his interviews, Bacon underlies this exchange as follows, quote, "I use very large brushes, and in the way I work, I don't in fact know very often what the paint will do, and it does many things which are very much better than I could make it do." The tangled forces of life that the artist's assemblage has to confront, on the other hand, originate from extensive landscapes, providing lived perceptions of individualities, such as, say, a human body in this example, carcasses of meat, and Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X, especially in Bacon's Figure with Meat, 1954. And also from intensive fields, providing lived affections, this time of individuations, such as concentration of transactive sensations like violence during the artist's generative solitude, and affective magnitudes spreading from the astounding, say, disorder of Francis Bacon's own studio at 7 Rhys Mews. So, artist is the actor who exercises vigilance during this exposure in detecting both the exuberant composition of visible extensities and the virtual trajectories of invisible intensities. For art begins at this stage not with a reduction, but with a contraction of life forces within the body of the artist's assemblage. And these forces of life are not only selected, contracted, and filtered, but also transformed to provide an expansion towards the artistic medium, towards, in this example, Bacon's unpried canvas. A triple movement then. First, superabundant forces of life seize the artist's assemblage, Then the assemblage transforms lived perceptions into a-signifying percepts and lived affections into non-representational affects. And finally, these percepts and affects are expanded towards the canvas to form a new artistic composition. This process, however, runs the risk of consenting to clichés, that is, the artist is always in danger of failing to shatter lived perceptions and move beyond lived affections. This failure results in weak compositions that limit and reduce life forces, whereas the artist's primary pursuit, as Virginia Woolf subtly puts, is nothing but to saturate every atom, or, as Bacon suggests, the artist is there to open up the valves of sensation and return the facts of life more violently back to itself. Thus, the primary questions of artistic production become: how much can you contract, how well can you saturate, and how far can you expand the forces of life? A second contraction takes place when the work of art, when Bacon's painting, comes to life. This time it is the painting that contracts, the painting that swallows all the intensive effects and percepts, all the extensive lines and colors in its body. From now on, the painting preserves these forces in its materiality and keeps them ready for another expansion. Hence, the painting is not only a visual archive, but simultaneously a sensation recording machine. When the painting interacts with its audience, it liberates the eye of the beholder from its fixed character as a merely optical organ and renders it polyvalent, with the capacity to process and disseminate these expanded intensities and sensations. And this is the moment the frame that is thrown over chaos is deframed once again, the moment the artistic production presents itself back to the forces of life in its experiential reception. But what is the diagram's role in all these processes? A diagram is an invisible but real developmental matrix that links unformed matters and non-formal operations via virtual patterns and thresholds, which are, in complexity theory terms, if you will, singularities, bifurcators, and attractors, beyond which an assemblage undergoes or generates qualitative changes. So the diagram of a heat matter, to give a concrete example following Manuel de Landa, links unformed matter of any medium for storing and transmitting heat and non-formal operations that separate, channel, and exploit heat differences. Such a diagram can be found in hurricanes as well as steam engines and refrigerators, which means the virtual developmental landscape of an operating diagram may be subject to divergent actualizations. The famous diagram of Michel Foucault's disciplinary power to jump to the socio-political milieu takes as its unformed matter the biopower of any human population and links it to the non-formal operations such as spatial allocation and segregation of bodies to relatively fixed places, regular monitoring and inspection via panoptic architectural mechanisms, keeping a constant record of every detail, and channeling bodies towards their self-utility, self-obedience, and self-purification. Once again, such a diagram has been incarnated in a myriad of modern institutions, from prisons and barracks to schools, asylums, and workhouses in the British context. As summarized by Deleuze and Guattari, a diagram, quote, draws lines of continuous variation while the concrete assemblage treats variables and organizes their highly diverse relations. A diagram is not a Platonic idea or a fixed universal, but a dynamic phase space, that is, a reservoir of virtual thresholds that lies at once real and stored. A diagram is like a virtual ocean on which an assemblage sails like a boat. The boat has the agency to choose its own speed and direction, yet there is the wind. There are shallow and deep waters, whirlpools and sea storms, monsters and Moby Dicks. So the boat is influenced by attracting and bifurcating thresholds within the oceanic developmental matrix and shapes its route by taking into account these constraints and opportunities while, of course, at the same time affecting back the oceanic, say, aqua space. So The artistic diagram, to get back to our specific topic, takes unformed matters such as lived perceptions of extensive landscapes and lived effects of intensive fields and links them to non-formal operations such as selection, contraction, transformation, expansion, and composition, as we previously discussed. Bacon's artistic assemblage extracts from its diagrammatic field its own peculiarities, namely a distinct selection of forces and events including raw violence and crucifixion, special transformative traits like blurring and deforming to arrive at certain sensations, and relational compositions of figures and frames to sustain a certain balance between pictorial consistency and chance operations. Yet, if the diagram is defined as a blind machinery of a concrete assemblage, mediating between matters and operations rather than subjects and forms, is it necessary that the position of the artist or the architect, the instigating actor of the constructive assemblage, is solely filled with a human? Charles Darwin, in his Descent of Man, particularly mentions a bird family called bowerbirds for their complex interactions with their environment and each other. Bowerbirds are renowned for their extreme courtship ritual that combines an elaborate architecture, artful arrangement of landscape ornaments, bodily performance and dance, as well as complex musical vocalizations. Amazed by the unified expression of this sophisticated assemblage, Darwin bracketed his theories of natural and sexual selection and remarked that bowerbirds must have an appreciation of beauty that, quote, they must receive some sort of pleasure from the sight of such things, unquote. But what kind of an assemblage does a bowerbird constitute in order to be considered an aesthetic actor even by the bedazzled Mr. Darwin himself? Among all the 20 species that are distributed in New Guinea and Australia, the bowerbirds with the most colorful and shiny plumage construct the simplest structures, whereas the ones having the drabbest plumage, such as Fogelkop bowerbirds that are uniformly pale brown, construct the most sophisticated bowers. According to bird ethologists, this means that bowerbirds have evolved to treat their complex and colorful bowers, their architectural constructs, as part of their expanded individuality, transferring the role of their brightly plumage to their architectural assemblage. The construction of a Fogelkop bowerbird's architectural assemblage follows similar diagrammatic operations with that of Bacon's artistic assemblage. First, a male bowerbird exercises vigilance in detecting extensive materials and intensive forces of the rainforest. Selection process starts as the bowerbird chooses a forest sapling to be used as a maypole on ridge crests, taking into consideration local geographic and environmental factors, such as topography, suitable vegetation, the proximity of food and water, and the amount of light that diffuses to the display area. Contraction, transformation, and composition processes follow, as the male bowerbird tightly weaves sticks around the maypole and shapes a conical hut of 2 meters in width and 1 meter in height. A single arched doorway is trimmed from the bower, and a thick carpet of fresh green moss of a few square meters is laid in front of this entrance. This mossy front yard is used as an exhibition space on which the male displays thousands of objects collected from the surrounding forest. Although details differ from bower to bower because of varying individual choices, commonly used artifacts include colorful flowers, leaves, and fruits, iridescent beetle-wing cases, shiny fungi, bird feathers, and even objects stolen from nearby human villages, like tinfoil, bottle caps, and pairs of socks. Then comes the composition process. Same type of objects or objects of same color are carefully grouped together by the male bowerbird. If a newly organized cluster disrupts the previously approved effect of another, the bowerbird updates the composition by discarding or repositioning other elements. So the overall composition has its own relational agency and suggests differentiating options with each input similar to that of Bacon's suggestive painting process. In fact, when in repeated experiments, bird ethologists mixed up the original composition of a bowerbird's decoration when the bowerbird was away, and added new objects to this arrangement, for example. It was observed that the bowerbird quickly returned to his bower, removed the new objects, and put everything back in its original position. This means the objects are not combined randomly, but arranged according to a compositional plan which the bowerbird extracts from an aesthetic diagram and keeps in his memory all along. The second contraction starts once the bower is finished and female bowerbirds start inspecting each bower to find the right mate. The expansion of the male bowerbird's assemblage towards the female is a Gesamtkunstwerk, so to speak, a total work of art, consisting of 1, the male's circular dance and postures of bowing low and straightening up, displaying his somatic vitality and plumage quality. 2, his varied vocal repertoire, including whistles, clicks, gurgles, and rattles, as well as the mimicry of other birds, other animals, as well as humans, for which the bower functions as an acoustic amplification chamber. 3, the structural quality of his bower displaying his architectural skills and indicating his ability to defend his turf from other bowerbirds. And finally 4, the quality of his earth art composition, so to speak, expressing both his foraging skills and artistic ability. But what about the bowerbird's diagram? For starters, the bowerbird's diagram links unformed matters of the rainforest's extensive landscape and intensive forces to non-formal operations of selection and contraction in order to transform, saturate, and compose them in the form of an amorous assemblage. Yet this amour does not reside solely between the male and the female, but is also a self-affirmation of life. That's why these formulations do not carry the risk of anthropomorphism, but they rather hint at a certain kind of geomorphism, that is, a becoming earth of the artist, a becoming earth of the human, a becoming earth of the bird. Ornithologists insist that the bowerbird's artistic assemblage cannot be solely explained by their genetic and instinctual makeup, but rather involves A, developmental learning processes between the young and the adult, B, culturally transmitted traits resulting in collectively differentiated assemblages from population to population and in their relation to their local environment, of course, and C, consistent individual peculiarities in their multimodal displays. The bowerbird's diagram then, as all diagrams, has broad parameters of openness inside a framework of thresholds and restraints. Every bowerbird assemblage incorporates the selective operations of the male, the female, the cultural traditions of its associated bowerbird population, as well as the forest itself, sometimes sailing along the potentials, other times within the restrictions, and from time to time against and beyond the thresholds by generating what Deleuze calls new deterritorializations. For that reason, the virtual thresholds of a diagram should not be treated as negative limits. Rather, a diagram is a machine of dynamic enabling constraints, as Masumi and Manning calls. So, is it possible for a flat ontology that excludes self-proclaimed supreme actors such as transcendent gods and omnipotent humans, and defines a cosmos in which all individuals and assemblages are on an equal ontological footing to give birth to a flat aesthetics? Here is an elaborate quote from Deleuze and Guattari. Quote, "Perhaps art begins with the animal that carves out a territory and constructs a house. The territory implies the emergence of pure sensory qualities that cease to be merely functional and become expressive features. No doubt, this expressiveness is already diffused in life, and the simple field of lilies might be said to celebrate the glory of the skies." And here they are already hinting at a flat aesthetics, but then they will be more specific with the animal. But the territory and the house, with the territory and the house, it becomes constructive and erects ritual monuments of an animal mass that celebrates qualities before extracting new causalities and finalities. This emergence of pure sensory qualities is already art, not only in the treatment of external materials, but in the body's postures and colors, in the songs and cries that mark out the territory, unquote. So, in lieu of a conclusion, we may close with Deleuze and Guattari's tendency of placing art and architecture, at least by implication, not solely in the subjective procedures of mankind, but in diagrammatic operations that involve human as well as non-human actors with their enmeshed assemblages, insofar as they contract and expand, reframe and deframe nature's superabundance itself. Thank you very much.
Again, if there are some questions, we could take them and then we swap with the futures again, because this is meeting and performance on the other side, but we don't need to copy any more the files, we just switch quickly. So please.
Quick question. So this expressionism is not addressed. It doesn't have it doesn't. In this particular case, it's, you want to say it goes beyond the courtship. I'm using here the Adolf Portman, this idea of non-addressed expressivity. Comes before we could think of any particular reason why it should be there. Yeah. That would be the flat.
Yes. Anyone else?
Are you drawing diagrams? If you're drawing only diagrams, or do you actually want to accentuate the aesthetic element?
Well, yeah, okay. An architectural diagram is a very specific form of diagram. So the way Deleuze uses diagrams in his, as I already mentioned, is in very different theoretical bases. So when he talks about diagrams, they are more ontological facts. They are like some kind of developmental matrix that is all around life, so that in which you can find your position and your you can actualize, or you can find your own generative trajectories and so on and so forth. When we talk about the diagram as a representational tool or an expressive tool, so to speak, then we were talking about something different. And here, in architectural theory, these two are usually thought to be the same thing. So Deleuze's diagrams are very easily taken out of their, context and used as if he's already talking about architectural diagrams, which of course he's not. And here, so to go back to your question specific, here, well, I think Marc Enguy is also in the room, and he's one of the figures that really influenced me, because I was always using architectural diagrams in my work with design, but never in my theory. So there was this differentiation when I was talking. I was always, showing photographs that are already there and art pieces and so on and so forth with my oral performance. But after seeing how Enguy expresses in Thousand Plateaus in his first chapters and so on and so forth, I immediately, there was a moment of, eureka, and I said, okay, I can also express myself simultaneously in two different registers, which have their own, speech and agency and their own, so to speak, language. So I think this is, in a way, it is not some kind of pure translation or representation of what I'm trying to say here, but it is more an intuitive relationship. And at the same time, I didn't draw it by myself, but with my partner, so it is some kind of collective that is behind the diagrams as well, to make it more joyful for us to experiment and so on and so forth. So I think they have their both different lives, but from time to time, they connect and elaborate more things, I hope, for the people, and sometimes they the images function to specify some certain things that I'm talking about here in a more, precise sense. But
so the moment in which the drawing and the diagram touch, that's the specific artistic research moment.
But yeah, it would be you who be able to tell, what kind of experience you have with the voice, but at the same time with the image, because I don't even see it while speaking. So,
thank you. Okay, I go back to the camera and switch to my second function.